We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelek Yud Zayin. This is volume 17, the third Perek of Pirkei Avos, in the back of the Likutei Sichos Chelek Yud Zayin. So the Rebbe explains the Mishnah in Perek Shlishi, in which Rab Chanina's Gan HaKohanim says that we should pray for the peace of the government because for not of their fear, a person would ishes reu chayim bloy. The Rebbe asks, what does this have to do with Pirkei Avos, which is supposed to be a step up, things that you want to live like a chassid, a righteous person. These are elementary things. How could we even say people want to swallow each other up? Doesn't seem. The Rebbe gives a whole new insight. The Rebbe says we're not talking about killing somebody, God forbid, or taking their money or something like that. We're talking about specifically Chayim Bloy. The Rebbe says we're talking about someone. The Mishnah is talking about somebody who happens to be a greater scholar in Talmud Chacham, and he looks down on somebody who is not as advanced as he is, and he thinks that because of his level, he should swallow up the other one's Chayim, and that the other one should be subjugated to him. You need Meirah, the Malchus, you need the Malchus Shemayim, in order to help you know your standing and consider the other person an equal. And that's why in the same Mishnah it follows Shnayim Sheyoshvim Ba'iskim Batoira, to tell you that there has to be two. You don't think that you are the only one. And the Rebbe will explain in detail, but let's go step by step. Perek Shlish Aleph. So Rabbi Chanina's Sgan HaKohanim Omer, Rabbi Chanina, who was the Sgan, he was the second assistant of the Kohen Gadol, he was the Sgan of the Kohanim. Omer, he said, Havei mispalel b'shloimo shel malchus, that you should pray for the peace of the government. Shilmole moiro, for it had not been for the fear of the government, Ishas re'eyu chayim bloi, so a man would swallow his friend. Seems to be a very difficult passage in the literal sense. So we need to understand. Aleph, what Azal Sogan, our rabbis of blessed memories, say in the man de boyel mehev chasido lekayim mili dovis. If one wants to become as Babakama, that if one wants to be a chassid, which is righteous, above the letter of the law, is lekayim chulu mil dovis. So then he should fulfill and observe the matters of Pirkei Avos. So he should do and learn and follow the guidance of the Pirkei Avos. That means, what does that mean? That means that Pirkei Avos is a level of a higher level, but thus meant as the Masechta Avos b'shteit family de Chasidusa, that the tractate of Avos consists of matters of righteousness, which is beyond the letter of the law. Was thus meant as for Azalcha and Hogis, that would be such kind of conduct was means in Zainit Mechuyev Mitzad Hadin, which you are not obligated straight from the law, from the halacha, nor Medav Zayton Mitzad Chasidus Lifnim Mishurus Hadin. But these are something that you have to do because of righteousness, because of Chasidus, which is Lifnim Mishurus Hadin, that is beyond the measure of the law, going higher and above the law. Take, for example, the first Mishnah in Perek Gimel. Al derech v'divrei in der erste Mishnah from the Perek, similar to the lesson in the first Mishnah of this chapter. What does it start? It doesn't say don't do Averis, because that would be obvious. It's telling you how to prevent that you shouldn't even come to an Aveda. The Mishnah says, Histakil begimul dvorim, look into three items, three things. Ve'ein atoboli de Aveda, you won't even come to an Aveda. This is going beyond the letter of the law. That's why it's in Pirkei Avos, because Shuras Hadin We go by the line of the judgment, meaning the halacha is mechayiv, nor that obligates only as that it zol nit ton the aveda b'poil, that the yid should not do this sin. Actually, in practical, shouldn't do the aveda. So that's not. What is the Mishnah? The Mishnah is adding. One of them is Mosif the Mishnah. So to that, the Mishnah adds anhoga chasidusis, a conduct of righteousness of chasidus, stein in a matzah von yiras hacheit, that you should stand in a standing of fearing the sin. This is, you should be, and this is also an advice. So we're talking about not just not doing this thing, but being afraid of the thing. Und das that also serves as counsel, und Anweis and an instruction, as only zukommen, afilu non dazu, that it should not come. Not come means don't even get close to it. Durch hereintrachten sich in the drei Sachen by considering and reflecting the three items. In ve'ein ato bo lidei avera. By thinking these three things, so then is they won't even come to an Aveir, not even close to an Aveir. That is very reasonable for the Mishnah to bring down, because this is Pirkei Avos, and we're talking about what's beyond the Shuras Adin. Over the Hira, but this lesson in our Mishnah, in the second Mishnah, that one you should pray for the peace of the government. Doesn't seemingly has no connection to a conduct of a measure of righteousness. This is or to be careful in something beyond the letter of the law. On the contrary, this is not beyond the level of the law. If we're going to caution somebody not to swallow the other person, swallowing another person is a elementary and a very serious offense. That is absolutely necessary, not to swallow up another person based on the instruction, the very serious instruction of the Torah, not the Midas Chasidus. So, why would we bring this down to Midas Chasidus? It means talking about something a little bit different, not in the literal sense. And it's also proven, the Rebbe says in Beis, because he doesn't use the Lashon to kill somebody, to hurt him, to take away his money. It says Chayim Beloy. What is the meaning of Chayim Beloy? To swallow him up. Base. What is the this precise language? A man, his friend, would swallow alive. The Loshen was is Rogelu Poshut in Azafal. The language which is common and obvious in a case when we want to talk about swallowing one up, is Hariga. A person without the government would kill each other. With the Loshen HaKosuf, as the Pasuk actually says, so he said that the reason he said Avraham, because he said that is not going to be, I thought there's no fear of Hashem and they'll kill me. So it says Haruguni. Or say that people would rob each other. If here, when it says they would swallow each other up, we're also talking about people would rob each other or cause other people damages, monetary damages. Okay, so then it should say one of those languages, Haraguni or some other thing that would reflect that would happen, versus saying Chaim Beloy, Farvos Verdo Genutz Achidush Loshen Ve'inyan. Why are we using over here? Why is being used over here a novel new language and an idea of Chaim Beloy? And now, even though it seems like this is talking about the world in general, not only about Jews, but everything starts from the Jew, so there is a similar concept needs to be by a Yid also. How could we talk about Ishes Reu Chaim Bloy when we're talking about somebody who's learning Pirkei Avos Milso de Chasidus or Gimel? Alle Inyonim in Welt seinen Tolu Yidin. Everything that happens in the world hinges on the Yid. It says in the state, as Oilam Nosan Belibam, the world he gave in their heart, which means that from the heart of the Yid comes the world. Und dem ist verstandig, from this we understand, as der Inyan von Ilmolei Meiro Ishes Reu Chaim Beloy, that this idea that we're talking about, had it not been the fear of the government, one man would swallow up alive his friend, is not just talking about goyim, about other people. Is do that also, God forbid, consensus finds itself by you. It starts with the Yid. Durch dem was Yidden führen aus der Heira, when the Yidden, when they accomplish and they follow the lesson of Mispalel B'Shleim Shel Malchus, wird der Inyan euch aufgetan in Welt. That also helps this concept to be accomplished and done in the world. So the Yidden pray for Shalom, and then the world will have the Shalom. As is only Zionishes Reu Chaim Beloy, there shouldn't be one swallowing up the other one. So basically, we're saying that we need the peace so that we don't swallow each other up. But if it's literally, it means that the Yid will swallow another Yid, which consequently we have to pray for the government, and therefore also the non-Yid will be protected. Shouldn't be. But how is we talking about people that are swallowing each other up? It's surprising. This is in Pirkei Avos. L'cheri is Tamua. This seems surprising. How does it apply that we say by the Yidden, Aschot is einen Paran, kama v'kama klorit tzivui Hashem. Although there are many and many clear instruction of Hashem, but is need is when need the murder for Malchus. If you didn't have the Eibush that tells you don't do this, all these things, and we're saying that if it's not the government, if we wouldn't fear the government, a Jew would have swallowed up. When I say would swallow up another person, we're talking about your friend. So how could it be? But we need the government to protect one Yid to not swallow up, especially we're talking about this is your friend. And especially Befrat, Kinal, especially we said earlier, we're talking about a Yid who is learning, practiced Avos. He wants to be a chassid. So he needs to be cautioned. Pray for the government as on need so that he does not swallow his friend. Seems a little strange. The Rebbe would have to explain, because of all this that we're talking about swallowing up, not in a literal sense, but in a metaphoric sense, taking away from somebody else's avodah and absorbing it into your own. And even though Mishuras Hadin, that may have be okay, but Mitzad Chasidis, it doesn't work, and you have to pray to the Shleimus Shel Malchus, meaning to have the Malchus Shamayim, the Yiras Hashem, and the Yiras Shamayim, in order to recognize that you actually Shnayim, as we will see the continuation from the Mishnah. Noch dem, gebrachten Maimer, after the statement, state in der Mishnah, Rabbi Chanina ben Tradian, Rabbi Chanina ben Tradian says, Shnayim sheyoshvim ve'ein b'neihem divrei Torah. If two people sit together and they don't discuss amongst them words of Torah, that's considered a sitting of people who are making fun of scorners. But on the other hand, if you have two people that sit and they do discuss Torah, the Mishnah goes on to say the Shechina is there, etc., etc. So this is all brought in the same Mishnah base in Pirkei Avos. And the Rebbe wants to know what's the connection between the first statement that one will swallow in another one to the second halacha, the second idea that is brought down, presented in the second Mishnah. What's the connection between them? And this is not just coincidental. We just divided. It's very precise, the dividing of the Mishnayos. We already spoken many times. Der Fernandetel von the Mishnayos, the dividing up of the Mishnayos, is bediuk. It's precise. Und das ist negeya la halacha lamaisa. This can be something which has a practical halachic, to know what a Mishnah is. Because sometimes you need to know that you learn three Mishnahs. How much is a Mishnah? Which is a Mishnah? So you need to know where the Mishnah begins and ends. So here, one Mishnah. So in our case, Lamashal Mishnah base would be this both statements. If you learned a half, you only learned the first statement, that wouldn't be a Mishnah. This could be important. This touches when we actually have a practical halacha. If a person would betroth a woman and he makes a condition, he says, this betrothal is dependent upon on the condition that I know Mishnayos, I know to be shown Mishnayos. As the Kedushin sein neufon Tanai, as can Mishnayos, that the Kedushim are on the condition that he knows Mishnayos. The Yesh Loimar, so you can say, how much Mishnayos does he have to know when he says I know Mishnayos in order for the Kedushin to be a good Kedushin? So there is one possibility to say, as is eine genug, that it's sufficient, nötig, and important to kennen drei Mishnayos. He needs to know three Mishnahs. So we need to know what the Mishnah. This is the law in Chelek the Rebbe brings down from the halacha that you might need to have three, or the Rebbe brings down you may need even one. But we need to define a Mishnah is defined by its number, what it is. And this may actually be the reason the Rebbe brings down why the Alter Rebbe Bechlal wrote the Mishnayos in the Siddur. Why did he have to bring down Pirkei Avos? And he didn't leave it for the Mishnayos because he wanted to teach you where the Mishnahs are, according to the Shara Koil. But Yesh Eimrim, others say, some say, as Oich zu libdem, that also because of this reason, or that Alter Rebbe reingestellt the Masechta Avos in Siddur, the Alter Rebbe placed the tractate of Avos in his Siddur. So wissen them oifen Chalukas HaMishnayos, so we know how the Mishnahs are divided, and as the Rebbe said before, it may be negaya to a halacha. So in that case, isn't it move on? So it's not understood. What is the flow, the continuation? What's the connection from Maimer, from the saying two people that sit and learn Torah? So Maimer have a mispala b'shleim to the previous one that says you should pray for the peace of the government. What's the connection? And it has to be a connection with the Farstein, Beidin, and Mishnah. That's why they both are written in the same Mishnah. Seemingly, you don't see, it's not visible any connection, any tie amongst these two inyonim of Mispal B'Shleim Shel Malchus and Shnaim Sheish Oiskim B'Torah. If you look at the Mishnah Gimel, it almost seems like the second part of Mishnah Beis belongs to Mishnah Gimel. V'adrabah, the Svar is Mechayiv, logic dictates, at the Maimerot HaShayches, that this saying of Rab Chanina ben Teradye has a connection that zugestellt werden to the weiterdicke Mishnah. That's connected and needs to be placed next to the next Mishnah. What does it say in the next Mishnah? There's three people ate together. They didn't say words of Torah. This is precisely the subject matter. But here we're talking about two people not learning Torah. Over there it talks about the advantage of learning Torah in a group. And the lacking when you have a group without words of Torah. So the question is, why is it placed this idea that Chanina ben Teradya in the Mishnah based after as a follow-up to Ishas Re'eu Chaim Beloy versus seemingly it would be better to put it in the beginning of Mishnah Gimel together with the other ones. Next Mishnah, which talks about Gimel Shachlu, of Divrei Torah, very similar subject. Gimel. So the Rebbe says the principle is the first thing we have to realize that we are not talking literally because we're talking about Milsa de Chasidusa. Since Tractate Avos contain matters of righteousness, even as mentioned earlier, dos haste, that means dos seinen heroes para Eden, that these are lessons for a Jew, was is ganz und aufgeht in Limud Torah. He's complete and he's careful in studying Torah and Kiyum mitzvahs and the observance of mitzvahs. Und im Feld nor, all that he is lacking is dan hoge for midas chasidus. He's lacking the measure, the conduct of conducting himself in a measure of righteousness. Everything else he's done. That's why it's Pirkei Avos. Learning now about how to do the extra chasidus. And therefore it's obvious. As is nit dokin ort im anzusagen that there is no really room for being instructed to be instructing him as nit bagazlen and atzveit niden, that you should not rob another yid. Unavada nit the mitzvah, for sure, not the command as only under them 11th fun aiden, not to touch the life of another yid. Is b'meile pashut farvos do state nit abavorenish. That's why it's obvious why Itaka doesn't say the language as the Rebbe has before. Fun ishes reyu harogui other bagazl, that it doesn't say that he would have killed his friend or robbed his friend. That's why, because we're not talking about a yid like that. We're talking about somebody who's complete in Torah and mitzvahs, and he's just trying to get the chassid. But there is a meaning in the word of chayim beloy. Doesn't mean kill, doesn't mean rob, but it means chayim beloy. The dik is the davke. The specific emphasis, precise language that we use here is ishes re'ehu, a man is friend chayim beloy, would swallow alive. Will nit onrin chas v'sholim, dem Leben und Eigentum und Zweitnieden. He does not, God forbid, want to touch, not the life and not the fortune or the monetary from another yid. That's not even, it's out of the question. Zayrotzen is nor, what he wants to do is chayim b'loi, to swallow his life, as der Leben, that the life, the Metzias and the Maisim, his existence, his actions, that is his life. The life of the other person, und zweitens soll sein eingeschlungen in sein Metzias. Should be absorbed, swallowed up in his Metzias. So he should be the Metzias, and he wants to swallow up the other ones. That the other one should not be an entity. Just he himself is the entity. Ulupamim is adrabe. And sometimes, on the contrary, the fact, the Mailus Asarhot, because he has these advantages, the advantages that he has, which is such as it is ganz in Limudat Torah, that he is complete in the study of Torah. Und is abgehit in mitzvahs, and he is careful with mitzvahs, kinal, as we said before. Und gegen them zeter, and on the other side, opposite of these, see that feel chesroinus. He sees many lackings by zweiten Yidden, by the other Yid. Befrat, especially if it's a case when Yener reads that ish poshut in Yidiyas HaTorah. The other person is a simple person in his knowledge of Torah. And also sometimes when the other person mitaheder has zihirus in kiyum hamitzvahs, he's lacking being careful in the observance of the mitzvahs. So on one hand, he is so learned, he is so religious, and he sees all the lackings that the other person is simple, doesn't really know so much Torah, and may not even be so careful in the observance of the mitzvahs. Bring them to. So this thing brings to the person, and that forces the person to the maskana, the conclusion, as yender darf sein bottle to him, that the other person needs to be subjugated to him, because he is so great and the other one is so simple. Unochber. Not only does he thinks it's a privilege. It's a privilege for the other person to be absorbed by him. This is a privilege and it's an advantage for the other person, as wird sein eingeschlungen in sein Metzies, that he'll be absorbed, swallowed up in the in the greater ones, in the learned men, in his Metzies. So, how do we combat such a kind of a thought? This is not something logically, because logically, maybe you are such a great person, maybe the other person needs to be subjugated to you. But that's why we're saying, have a mispalo b'shleima shel malchus, you need yira shamayim, you need shleima shel malchus. Let's look inside. Dalet. Kidei zu shoyle zayin az hahergesh unhanhoge, in order to negate such a kind of a feeling and such a kind of a conduct, is nit genug seichel dika hasbara. It's not sufficient a logical explanation. Warum adrabe? Because if you approach it logically, mitzad seichel, from the perspective seichel amiti, if you use real intellect, we're not talking about somebody who's just an arrogant person and misjudges himself, and then he's being arrogant. And we are not discussing here a fool, an evil, and an arrogant of spirit. That's not a seichel amiti. That's it. He persuades himself of his greatness. But chas v'shalom, we're not talking about such a person. We're talking about a person who really evaluates, and he sees himself in this true light, and he sees the other one in the way he is. So when you talk about logic, there is room for such an argument. Soif kol soif, in the end, after everything, take into consideration, is Erdoch HaGodel in Torah. He is great in Torah. And in Kiyam HaMitzvahs, and in the observance of mitzvahs. And at the same time, what is his friend? Nobody. In the side when Re'eyu is go to fight for the Madrege. His friend is very distant, he's far away from that level. So he's in a much higher, greater level than his friend. And that's a true consideration, calculation. On their Kashman is emes. This calculation is true. Along the path and the measure of Torah. And especially if the other person needs you for his learning of Torah, especially if the other person needs to come on to the other person in limudat Torah, that he needs to teach him. He needs to come on to learn Torah. He needs you. And also, and also instructions of observance of mitzvahs. So you consider yourself a much higher level, and the person should sort of be absorbed in your mitzvahs and not be an entity from himself. But logically, it makes maybe sense. Nafilu noch der ganzer. Even after you make explanation that this is not really right, but this is still a logical explanation. It is explaining a calculation. Well, this is not really the right way to absorb another person, even if you're greatness. But after all this, as a davzich firin anders, that you should conduct yourself different. You shouldn't really have that attitude. And you shouldn't really absorb the other person. Noch als nicht kennen optreten von sein Hanoche. He still cannot remove himself from that which makes sense to him, what lies by him. That his greatness in the person is really a nobody, and he needs him, so he should not figure as any entity at all, the other person. As an Eud of sein Botlum Balu and sein Metzias, that his friend needs to be subjugated and be swallowed up, absorbed in his Metzias. So how does one combat? You can't use logic in this, because logically you actually have a point. But the Eitzah zu poil sein by sich shlemus lilas anal kidaboy. So what is the advice in order to affect by yourself that to negate that above approach properly, to really appreciate the other person and really not absorb the other person, is to mekayim sein the hero from their Mishnah. That is to fulfill the lesson of the Mishnah. Havei mispalel b'shloimo shel malchus. We're talking about here praying for the peace of malchus, of the government. If you pray for the peace of government, was durch them, when you pray for the government through this, wird bei ihm erweckt werden die Meure von Melech Malchei Hamlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That will wake up the fear. When you pray for the government, will wake up the fear of the Melech, the king, who kings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Und der Hergesh had Yira, and when you have that sense, that feeling of a fear, awe of the Melech Malchei Hamlochim, that has the power to impact by him, as soll sich nicht halten groß, that you should not hold yourself big relative to another yid. You should not be haughty next to another yid. What does it help praying for the government? Because praying for the government, Malchus really is associated with Malchus Shemayim when we say Malchus. That's better in them. The explanation in this, Rabbi Seinu Zichreinom Livracha Zogan, our sages of blessed memory say, Malchuso da'ara ki ein Malchuso derikia. That the government below, the Malachim below, is somewhat of the government of the sky, of the heavens above. That's better the funis. What does that mean? Ki yedua, as it's known, as Malchuso da'ara kum ta'rob, that how do we get the government here in this world? It descends durch Hishtalshelus for Malchuso derikia, through an evolution, a chain reaction, till it comes from the Malchus of the heaven, Malchus derikia. Del Melech dolemato, the king here below, hot sein shoydish, in sein sar lemailo. He is rooted in his officer above. Und der shoydish von sar, and the root of his officer of the sar is in a hecher darga, is in a higher level, higher step. When azoi hecher and hecher, so higher and higher. As the pasuk says, gavoya mal gavoya shomer, guard one higher than the other one. So there's always a level from the king that goes to the sar, goes to higher. The fun is verstandig. So from this, it's understood. Abishah says is the shloimo shel malchus bepashtus, when there is peace of the government. Literally, in the simple meaning, there's peace in the government. So, as malchuso da'ara herrscht mit hashlemschul, which means that the government in the world is ruling in a wholesome way is that emeser tam v'sibet to them. So what is the real reason? What makes it wholesome? Because in malchuso da'ara, because in the government in below of the earth, it expresses itself the root. Malchuso de rekia. Malchuso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The government of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem's kingdom, mit aggressor and take it with more force. So when you see that there is sholem b'malchusay, there is shlemus in malchusa da'ara, so that expresses also the root of the malchus of the heaven, the malchus of Kadosh Baruch Hu, with more force when there is sholem. On their far, and therefore, when I eat was halt shown by Mila de Chasidusam. So when a yid who already is up to the level of words of righteousness, which means he's already in a madrega that the basics are covered, and he's now dealing with matters of Chassidus. And therefore, at that stage, you can see every aspect as it is in its truth. Is ein Tefillah in dem Inyan von Shloima Shel Malchus. So in his prayer, in the idea of to the peace of the government, filtered in them, so he feels the peace of the government filtered in them, to the extent of very vivid seeing. It's Mamash sees that Malchus Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He sees Hashem's kingdom reflected by its source, the kingdom of Hashem, in the government of the worldly king. Through the kingdom, through the king of the world, that arouses the sense of fear for the king who is the king of kings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, and what does that do? Once you can arouse that level of Meira Shamayim, und the Etzem Yira Far dem Obersten, and that the fact that there is this fear for Hashem, oil that impacts by him, this impacts him that by this person, also his haughtiness is subdued. Sein Groß halten sich legabe at zweiten Yidden. He's holding himself bigger next to a second Jew. You get subdued. Because when we talk about Hashem's blessed kingdom, is the Chashava Mashvekot Megodl. Hashem makes equal. He's equal and makes equal the big, the minor, the small, and the big. So next to Hashem, it's all the same. He subdues himself, being great in the presence of Hashem. When you enter the Malchus Shamayim, you're not so great. Next to Hashem, everybody's equal. The Godel Shebegedolim is Legamri Nitefes Mokim. The great one amongst the great does not take up any more space. Does not take up any space, just like the smallest of the smallest. And therefore, that will give you the sense of the other one's importance and the lack of your haughtiness raising yourself above. And just to know this isn't sufficient, you got to pray for it. Praying, because on your own, you may have a hard time accomplishing this. Hey, the Yetzer Hara is Oberan Umar. He's a craftsman. You know, he knows exactly how to get you. In sein Arbeit, in his work, so Arab Firen dimension from Derech HaYosher to lead the person down, get him off of the straight path. The Yetzer Hara knows how to do it. The Riber, that's why, is nit genug It is not sufficient, those was allein, that he himself, with seine eigene Keuches, with your own powers, wird sich misbeinen sein in Inyan von Shlomo Shel Malchus, that you will reflect about the idea of Shlomo Shel Malchus on your own without praying. As Malchus of the Aris came Malchus the Rikiachulu, that this government below is like the government above, which would give you that sense of Yira, Kinal said before. Borum sees Olul, because it's possible. If you just as Nocha Gewissens man, that after a certain time, soll die Hisbeunenes aufhören zu wirken gedeboy. So that reflection will stop impacting you properly. It's not gonna go through for all the time. Because of the tricks of the Yetzer, of the inclination. And as it weakens, bis the moide wird werden aufgeschwacht, to the extent till this fear will be totally weakened, und in ganzen this battle werden and totally be nullified. So we can't just say misboinen b'shleima shel malchus. Look at the government and look at that machus darke machus darikia, and that should bring you to Shamayim. Can't rely on that. The Yitzhar is stronger and finds tricks and it's not going to be lasting. The far is mudgish in the Reirah. That's why in the lesson that the Pirkei Avos says, it's emphasized. You have to pray for the shalom of the government. That he's bonus. You should not just rely on the reflection with your own powers. There are most you need to come on to pray. You need to tefillah, to pray, to tefillah on oisbeten, and to accomplish and get from Hashem as their Eibishter soll ihm helfen, that Hashem should help him with Tuvei u'bechazdei, with Hashem's goodness and Hashem's kindness. Chesed chinom, mispalel, that's a kindness, undeserved kindness, chinom, without being deserved. As our sages of blessed memory say, without Hashem's help, you can't beat the Yetzer Hara. But you're asking Hashem, help me. I need your help in all of the above, to be able to be subdued and not hold myself bigger and not want to swallow up another person. Bis as dur them der malchusa da ara. So he's saying that through the reflection of the kingdom of here in this world, so a makizain on the feeling that he should recognize and he should sense them Eivish's malchus, the kingdom of Hashem. And now we'll understand the continuation of the hemshach of the Mishnah, v'shnaim sheyoshvim v'oiskim b'Torah. But the mitvet zayin move on. With this, we can understand the weiterdiker hemshach from the Mishnah, the following continuation of the Mishnah. If two people sit without discussing Torah, then a Moshe relates them, and if they do consider, then the Shechin is there. The richtiger Bavais, what is the proper proof as the Odom that a person was held by Mila di Chasidusa, who is at the level that he's learning Pirkei Avos because he wants to do matters of Chasidus. In other words, after this follows, he already studied Torah as necessary and is careful in mitzvahs. But that he really negated his feeling from his nasus and gaiber, from haughtiness and arrogance, like Abed and Zulas, relative to another person, is in them. Is how could we prove this? Is this was euch sein lernen Torah is an ofen that also when he learns Torah is in a way von shnayim sheyoshim chulu, two people that sit and learn Torah. Then you know that there's two, that there is a sense of acceptance and appreciation for the other person, and it's not that you're negating and you're the mitzias, abir. Explanation. The Iker Mitzias Fun Aleim Torah. What is the entity? What is the learning of Torah? We're talking about in Pirkei Avos a person who's studying Torah. So what is it about the person that learns Torah? Is das Gufa. What is his main? What's his essence? What is his existence? It's Torah. Is das Gufa an Asik in Torah. His occupation in Torah, that makes his whole being. When Allah seine anderen Yonim and all of his other matters, seine nit mehr wie toffeldike Sachen, they're only secondary matters. They are not important matters. With the Pasuk Zog, the Pasuk says, Al Yishalel Chocham v'chochmasoi gomer, that the Chocham should not praise himself with his wisdom, etc. Hagigiber bigvurasoi, nor the powerful man with his strength, or Ashir ba'ashrei, or the wealthy man with his wealth. Don't praise with that. Why? As the Rebbe says in the parentheses, was chochma, gevura and ashiris, wisdom, strength, and wealth. Seine Sachen was ändern sich in Gang fürs Man. Those are matters that change as time goes by. Ki'im, so the pasuk says, don't praise yourself with this, but what should a person praise himself? Haskel v'yadua oisi, understanding and knowing me, knowing Hashem. Torah, because why? Because Torah is azach was is ständig. Torah is something which is always nitzchis, it's eternal. Kiheim chayenu v'oirech yomenu. They are our life and the length of our days. Valderech Razal, and similar as what our sages of blessed memory said, Maniach Anias Kolu Monish Olam. I will put away all kinds of crafts in the world. Ve'eni Malamedes B'ni Ella Torah. All what I'm going to teach my son would be Torah. Hulu ben Arusah, Hulu b'Zkenusa, in his youth and his elder. Torah remains non-touchable, is consistent and constant. And that is, whether he's young and old, is the Torah. That becomes his essence, the study of Torah. That's the important thing. Everything else is secondary. Since that Torah is the true essence of the one who occupies himself in Torah, which what we're talking about in Pirkei Avos, is move on, so it's understood as the Bittel von seinem Hus und Metzies wird gemosten. So how can we measure the subjugation of your essence, your Metzies, Leuten hergesh habittel was hot beim Lernen Torah, by the sense of your humility, your subjugation, which you are when you learn Torah. That's what we can tell. That's what we can tell what you've accomplished with yourself, that you are not an entity, but rather a subjugated. How do we tell that? Is when you have shnayim, when you can get the other person, get together with the other person. Und das ist der diuk shnayim sheyoshvim. Two, that's it. Calls man as the loimed is margish, for as long as the one who is studying feels, as is einer, that he's one, he's just one. But he's just me learning Torah. What does the other person know? He just know I'm the Chacham. Is the Chacham. He is the sage. Occupies himself, comes up with novelties in Torah. As long as you have that feeling, is ein Lernen nicht beöffnen von Schneim Shiyeshim. So you're not learning in a way two together. It's just you alone. Nicht wie zwei was lernen sitzen dich begleich. You're not like two that are sitting together equally. In a gleicher yeshiva, Shnaim Shiyeshim, you're sitting together, that you're equal while you're sitting. Shnaim Shiyeshim. Since you consider yourself, you're the head of the economy. Und dem Zweiten, and on the other person, you look as the Einer Vasitz via Talmud, like somebody who's sitting as a student. And in front of the teachers, there would be different lines. The very inferior students send the back line. We don't, who even knows in what line? It could be in a faraway line. It's not two people sitting and learning equally. That's when you still have your mitzias. Dafke when that is bottled mitan emes, specifically only when you are subjugated truthfully. Demult is ein limud mitreeu v'chulu. Then how is your study with your friend? In an oifon von shnayim sheyeshu. Then you're two sitting together. Nit feeling the meile von ein lemit legabe dem zweiten, without feeling the advantage one learner relative to the second one. Damut vert shchina shruya. And then when you learn, you have the divine resting over there. Because the Shechina is the Gilu from Malchus Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The divine, the Shechina, that's the revelation of the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which Ilmole Mero, Chaim Beloy, that's the Shloimer Shel Malchus. Yadua, as it's known, B'shas Ayid, Poil by sich dem Bittel, when a Yid affects by himself that subjugation, by praying for the government's peace, that he is in the sense of two equals that are sitting. That's when the Shechina rests. It is revealed the level of Hashem's kingdom, Malchus Derekia. Shechina Shruya. Vidosis mitzad atzma. Then you get the Shechina on its own, nit nor durch hislapshus and Malchus Adara, not only through dressing up in the kingdom of the ground of the earth, but you get directly from Malchus Derekia. Because durch them ver die shleimus hayira und bittul zelakus. That way you have the wholesome fear and subjugation to godliness, vidosis mitzad HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it's from Hashem's perspective, and that's the Shechina Shruya that you get over here directly and undressed up in the Malchus Adar. Zayin. Apikola now, based on all the above, but when euch verstehen dem Loschen und dem Seder in Posuk, will also understand the language and the order of the verse, was bringt sich in der Mishnah, that is brought down in the Mishnah to support that the Shechina Shruya, when you have two people, oiskim b'divrei Torah. The Mishnah brings down the Posuk, as nidberu yira Hashem ish al re'eyu, when those who fear Hashem spoke one to their friend, Vayakshiv Hashem Vayishma, and God listens, pays attention and listens, Vayichtav Sefer Zikaron Lefonov, and he writes a book of remembrance before him, L'yira Havaya, those who fear Hashem, and those who consider his name. Why are we talking so much about Yirei Hashem, the fear of God, when we're mainly talking about the study of Torah? The L'chayre Avibal Men Red Dov Vegin Shnayim Sheyesh V'yesh Beineihem Divrei Torah. We're talking about two people sitting, and amongst them there is words of Torah. Parvos ruft men ze on Yirei Hashem. Why are we calling them those who fear Hashem? Yirei. Why are we talking about fear of Hashem? What is it important and connect here to call them with the description of Yirei Hashem? So the Rebbe explains that the Yirei Hashem is a prerequisite to actually get the Shechina Shruya. Those was yesh beineihem divrei Torah, amongst them, that there's the Shnayim, and there's two of them, they're together. That accomplishes, that poils. Ashchina Shrui Benim, Shchina should come amongst them. Is there far while they're nidberu? Why could it be? Is because their discussion is in an oifum for Yireh Hashem, is because they are learning Torah in a way of Yireh Hashem, of fear of Hashem. By Zay is durch them mispalel b'shloime shel malchus geyitzveh. By them is through the praying and the peace of the government and similar, the Yireh from Melech Malcham Lochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that fear of the Melech Malcham Lochem Hashem in an oifun golui niker v'nirgash. It is in a revealed, recognized and felt way, because there is the Yireh Hashem. So you have the sense of togetherness. Azoi as a nidbru in Torah. So to the extent that when they discuss Torah, is mitzadem was a zainin in their darge, is it because they are on the level from Yireh Hashem Ishal Re'eu, those who fear Hashem, a man to his friend. That hepech from Ishas Re'echaim Beloy. This is the opposite. Ishas Re'echaim Beloy is swallowing up one another, but here is Yireh Hashem Ishal Re'eu, there is level of togetherness. That's why they reach through their study of Torah to the Madrege fun Choshvei Shmai. They consider Hashem's name Koilel Oir. Also, this that they will sense Abazei der Herzig as Kol Torah is, that they sense that the entire Torah is Shmoisov Shalakadosh Baruch Hu, the names of Hashem. That comes because Nidbru Yireh Hashem, and because of the Yireh Hashem, that brings about. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Shlach, Tavshin Lamed Hey.